This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Welcome, everyone, to the monthly free public lecture of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Ready to get started, if everyone could take a seat. Thank you all for coming in this weather. Unfortunately, we probably would have had quite a few more if it hadn't been for the weather, but as I was saying to our speaker, the hardcore are here. So congratulations for being in the hardcore. It's now time to introduce our special guest. Registered dietitian and nutritionist Brenda Davis is a leader in her field. She's worked as a public health nutritionist, clinical nutrition specialist, nutrition consultant, and academic nutrition instructor. She's past chair of the Vegetarian Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group of the American Dietetic Association. She's written numerous professional and lay articles, and she's also the author of five best-selling books. I'm sure Ms. Davis would be happy to autograph a copy for you. An internationally acclaimed speaker, she recently completed a 7-month, 38-state speaking tour, speaking to thousands of health professionals and lay people. She's been a featured speaker at the National Nutrition Conferences in London, England, and Brussels, Belgium. And she has lectured at the International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition at Loma Linda University, Andrews University, and to the health and temperance leaders of Martinique and surrounding areas. Brenda lives with her husband and family in British Columbia, Canada, and we're delighted that she's with us here in Hawaii tonight. Please welcome Brenda Davis.
Boy, I'm very fancy. Thank you. Well, it is such a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Vegetarians of Hawaii for inviting me, and I want to thank every one of you for taking the time to be here this evening. When we really think about the optimal diet and what we're doing here and what we're trying to learn, the focus is really about life and supporting life, all life, not just our own. So I'm going to try to support you in taking steps in a very positive direction. We'll begin by defining the optimal diet. So what do we mean by optimal? Well, I think most people would describe it as a pattern of eating that promotes the very best possible health and well-being. And of course, the diet has to be nutritionally adequate, and it must also minimize our risk of chronic disease. When you think about nutritional adequacy, most people in North America think it's not very difficult to meet our nutrient needs. If you look around, you wouldn't think very many North Americans actually suffer from malnutrition. When you think about malnutrition, what comes to mind? Africa, you think of a child with wasted limbs, with a bloated stomach. In fact, there's a new face of malnutrition. Overconsumption affects 1.2 billion people worldwide, and this is equal to the number of people suffering from the form of malnutrition called hunger. For the first time in the world, in the year 2000, these two forms of malnutrition affected equal numbers of people. In fact, overconsumption is basically epidemic in the United States. 65% of Americans are overweight or obese. And overconsumption is a major factor in the chronic diseases responsible for over 70% of all deaths in America. In 1990, the World Health Organization commissioned a panel of experts from around the world to determine the strength of the link between diet and disease. And they came up with a report, over 200-page report, and they said the following in this report. Medical and scientific research has established clear links between dietary factors and the risk of developing coronary heart disease, hypertension, stroke, several cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. This knowledge is now sufficiently strong to enable governments to assess national eating patterns, identify risks, and then protect their populations through policies that make healthy food choices the easy choices. And they cautioned governments around the world about their very strong ties to the agriculture industry because they will undermine the health of the population. The World Health Organization actually specifically describes the dietary pattern that is most strongly linked to the diseases that are killing us. And they described it as follows. Such diseases are embodied in the so-called affluent diet, a pattern of eating typified by high consumption of energy-dense foods of animal origin and of foods processed or prepared with added fat, sugar, and salt. They are very specifically pointing to two categories of foods. What are they? Foods of animal origin, so animal foods, and foods processed or prepared with added fat, sugar, and salt. Processed foods. Those are the two major categories of foods that are causing our problems. If you look very specifically at the dietary factors that we know increase the risk of chronic diseases, they are saturated fat, trans fatty acids, cholesterol, refined carbohydrates, excessive animal protein, and excessive salt. We could probably add a few more, but we have to condense a little. Where does saturated fat come from? Mainly animal foods. Trans fatty acids, processed foods. Cholesterol, only animal foods. Refined carbs, processed foods. Excessive animal protein, only animal foods. Excessive salt, mainly processed foods. And they also describe the pattern that will reduce our risk of chronic disease most effectively. The health needs of the population are best met by a high carbohydrate diet. Such a diet is characterized by a frequent consumption of vegetables, fruits, cereals, and legumes. When we take a look at the major factors, or the most potent factors reducing our risk of chronic disease, they are fiber, antioxidant vitamins, phytochemicals, plant protein, and healthful fats. Well, fiber is found exclusively in plant foods. Antioxidant vitamins, primarily plant foods. Phytochemicals, exclusively plant foods. Plant protein, exclusively plant foods. Healthful fats, primarily plant foods. The top 10 sources of calories in the U.S. diet are yeast breads, 95% of which are white breads, cakes, cookies, donuts, baked goods, soft drinks, milk, poultry, cheese, alcohol, mayonnaise and salad dressing, and our token veggie in at number 10, French fries, potato chips, and other potatoes. Take a look at this list, and what you're seeing is animal foods and processed foods. That's what Americans are consuming. And that's why Americans are facing an epidemic of chronic disease. Maximizing protection against these diseases involves 3 simple steps. Step 1, taking out the trash. We've got to get rid of the animal products and processed foods. Saturated fat, we know, increases our risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, several cancers, and kidney disease. What are the primary sources? Well, the major sources are animal foods. Dairy products, 60 to 66% of the fat in dairy is saturated. Meat, about 35 to 50% of the fat is saturated. Poultry, about a third. Fish, about 20 to 30%. We get a minor amount of saturated fats from tropical oils. Coconut oil is about 90% saturated. Palm and palm kernel, about 50 and 85% saturated. Optimal health guideline for saturated fat, less than 7% of our calories should come from saturated fat. And that is a World Health Organization guideline for high-risk populations. And our population is a high-risk population. How much is less than 7%? Well, in a 2,000-calorie diet, that's less than 16 grams of saturated fat. I should tell you, before even showing you this slide, that the average omnivore or the average meat eater gets about 10 to 14% of calories from saturated fat. So that's almost double what's recommended as an upper limit. The average vegetarian gets about 8 to 10%, and the average vegan is bang on where we should be, about 4 to 7% for most vegans. In fact, you could eat all of the following foods and you would be getting less than 10 grams of saturated fat. You could eat 10 servings of fruits and vegetables, 8 servings of whole grains, 2 servings of beans, 1 serving of tofu, couple of servings of soy milk, an ounce of nuts, and an ounce of seeds. And you'd still be considerably below the maximum recommended intake for saturated fat. Practical pointers here. Use plant protein, such as legumes and tofu, nuts and seeds, as your primary sources of protein. Use dairy alternatives in place of cow's milk and other dairy products. If you do use dairy, choose non-fat dairy. Moving on to trans fatty acids. Trans fatty acids are a problem because they increase blood cholesterol levels. And in fact, they actually increase bad cholesterol and they decrease good cholesterol or HDL cholesterol. So that's a double whammy. Not very many other things in our diet do that. They get incorporated into our cell membranes and keep what we want in our cell membranes out. Basically, cell membranes are fat, and they're extremely important for cell-to-cell communication to allow things in and out of cells. And when we take in a lot of trans fatty acids, we are dumbing down our cells. We literally make our cells stupid. They can't function very well when the primary fat incorporated in them is trans fatty acids. And in fact, the thinking is that they make our cells so stupid that insulin can't work properly in our cells or on our cells, and they increase our risk for things like diabetes. Gram for gram, trans fatty acids are actually considered 2 to 4 times more damaging than saturated fats. So what are trans fatty acids? Well, they are literally unsaturated fats that have been changed from liquid oils to solid fats. So it's like taking Crisco oil and turning it into Crisco shortening. Okay? And why do we do that? Well, when you turn a liquid fat into a solid fat, you make it more stable. Okay, so it can be incorporated into products, sit on the grocery store shelf for a couple of years. You can cook at very high temperatures with these trans fatty acid rich oils. So manufacturers like it very much. It is produced by the partial hydrogenation of liquid oils. So basically we add hydrogen under pressure to fat, and that turns it into a hard fat. And it basically, most unsaturated fats are kind of like a curved molecule. And when we turn them into trans fatty acids, we straighten them out, make them hard and rigid. They can also be formed by bacterial fermentation in the intestinal tract of ruminant animals. And so a lot of people thinking that trans fatty acids are always unnatural. They're not always unnatural. They actually are formed in animals as well. So what are the sources? Well, 90% of trans fats come from processed foods and fried foods. Most fast food restaurants do use hydrogenated oils to prepare French fries and other deep fried foods. Optimal health intake for trans fatty acids, 0. We don't want any of this stuff in our diets. To get rid of this stuff, you've got to read labels. You've got to look and see, make sure that there's no partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, no shortening in the product. Cholesterol, too much cholesterol increases blood cholesterol levels, but also increases the risk for several types of cancer, including endometrial, lung, and pancreatic cancer. The human body actually makes 800 to 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day. That's a lot of cholesterol. We don't have any dietary requirement for cholesterol. We need 0 milligrams of cholesterol. So where do we get it? We get it from animal products, all animal products. See, animals make cholesterol. Plants actually make sterols as well. Cholesterol is just a type of sterol. Plants make sterols like beta-sitosterol. Plant sterols are actually good for us. So how much do we find in foods? Well, cholesterol, a lot of people think cholesterol is concentrated in the fat of animals. It's actually concentrated more in the muscle of animals, but particularly in vital organs. So vital organs are extremely high in cholesterol, brain being the highest, then liver and kidneys. So any of those organs, for people that eat them, are very, very high cholesterol products. Eggs, as we all know, are little cholesterol pills. Shrimp and other shellfish, very high. A lot of people think that beef is high and pork are higher than poultry. They're really not. There's very, very little difference in these meats, all about the same. Fish, depending on the type, can be a little bit lower, but still in the same ballpark. And of course, plant foods contain 0 cholesterol. All plant foods are cholesterol-free. Excessive animal protein. This is one that a lot of people are just simply unaware of as problematic in the human diet. But diets that are very high in animal protein may increase blood cholesterol levels independent of saturated fat and cholesterol, just by itself. Promote tumor growth. And I don't know how many of you have read the China study or have heard Dr. T. Colin Campbell speak, but if you haven't, please do think of purchasing a copy of the China study. It is one fascinating read. Dr. Campbell is very, very convinced that animal protein is probably the most significant tumor promoter in the human diet. And he feels that of all animal proteins, casein is probably the worst. Certainly a lot of animal protein can put a lot of stress on kidneys and liver. It also induces urinary calcium losses, so we end up peeing out more calcium when we consume a lot of animal protein, which of course has negative impacts for bone health. Decreases insulin sensitivity, increasing our risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. It can also trigger something we call leaky gut syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but basically when you eat a lot of animal protein, it actually changes the flora in your gut. And by changing the flora in your gut, it can do a little bit of damage to the intestinal lining. And it can allow intact proteins to leak out into the bloodstream and increase immune inflammatory disorders like arthritis, for example. Animal protein, and particularly animal flesh foods, are very rich sources of oxidative stressors. Every single disease process known to mankind involves oxidative damage, free radical reactions. And so we don't want a lot of oxidative stressors. We want antioxidants. And certainly we will always have oxidative stressors in our body, but we want the balance between antioxidants and oxidative stressors to be in the favor of the antioxidants. But if we look at animal flesh foods, we're looking at a lot of environmental contaminants because these environmental contaminants actually move up the food chain. Things like dioxins, PCB, DDT. And dioxins, I don't know if you realize this, but the most potent source of dioxins in the human diet is fish. So these things are bioaccumulators. They move up the food chain. I don't know if you've ever heard of this stuff. It's called Nu-5GC. And very recently, probably within the last couple of years, we have found these pro-inflammatory molecules in animal flesh. And in fact, when humans eat the animal flesh, they find themselves locating in our flesh. They are extremely pro-inflammatory molecules. So bad news as well. AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. These things we do make in our bodies, but we also get them from food. The most potent sources being processed meats and meats cooked at high temperatures. And finally, the byproducts of high temperature cooking, like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and heterocyclic amines. These things are produced when we expose meat particularly to very high temperatures, such as we do when we barbecue. But there are a lot of things, even in, for example, starchy foods, we can produce byproducts of high temperature cooking like acrylamide in things like potato chips. So high temperature cooking can be problematic even with foods that aren't animal products. So we really need to be conscious of that, and that's one of the reasons we want to include a lot of raw foods in our diet. And when we do cook, the best ways of cooking would be very lightly, like steaming. If you get a copy of the China study, you'll read all about this, but rural Chinese average about 7 grams of animal protein a day. That's less than 10% of their total protein intake. The China study found that even small amounts of animal protein increase the risk of heart disease and cancer in rural Chinese. And this was quite a shock to the researchers. They did not expect this. They expected that because the intake was so low, that little increases would make absolutely no difference to health. They were stunned to find that even small increases in animal protein foods made a fairly significant impact on the risk of disease. North Americans average about 70 grams of animal protein a day, or about 70 to 80% of their total protein intakes. Huge difference. Practical pointers, again, most of your protein should come from plants. We need about 10 to 15% of our calories from protein. This is very easy to achieve on plant-based diet because most plant foods contain over 10% of their calories from protein. The only group of foods that is lower is fruit, which is about 1 to 10%. Vegetables, root vegetables are around 7 to 12. Other vegetables are around 20 to 40% of calories from protein. Things like broccoli and spinach are around 35 to 40% of calories from protein. Legumes around 20 to 39% of calories from protein. So easy to meet total protein requirements when you eat real food. People blow it because they eat junk. If you eat mostly sugar and fat, you may not get enough protein, but if you're eating real whole foods, it's not a very difficult task. Next, and super, super important for people who have been switching over to a plant-based diet, is refined carbs. This, I really truly believe, is the biggest blunder most vegetarians make. They switch from a meat and potatoes diet to a pasta and bagels diet. And I know there will be people out there thinking, uh-oh. But refined carbohydrates increase the risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and gastrointestinal disorders. So what are refined and unrefined carbohydrates anyway? Well, refined carbohydrates include 2 categories of foods, sugars and starches. Sugars being things like white sugar, brown sugar, syrup, candy, soda pop, and starches being products made from white flour, white rice. A lot of people misunderstand this sort of complex versus simple carbohydrate thing. A lot of people think simple sugars are bad, complex carbohydrates are good. That is not true. There are many complex carbohydrates that are bad. They're made from refined white flour. Unrefined carbohydrates include the very two same categories of foods. The sugars from fruits and vegetables. The starches from whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, starchy vegetables. The refined carbohydrates, people are literally taking out everything of value to human health before they eat them. Okay? Whereas the unrefined carbohydrates, we actually leave the good stuff there. Simple as that. So what's the big deal? In the process of making white flour, we are removing 80 to 90% of the fiber, 70 to 80% of the vitamins and minerals, and 95% of the phytochemicals. Are carbohydrates the problem, as Atkins would have us believe? You know, there are some things that Atkins got right. One thing he got right was that refined carbohydrates are really damaging to health. But guess what he did? He lumped all carbohydrates in the same category, which was a huge mistake. Carbohydrates are not the problem. In fact, if you look around the world, the lowest rates of obesity and chronic diseases on the planet are actually in areas with the highest carbohydrate intakes, around 65-75% of calories from carbs. The key to healthful, high-carb diets is the source of the carbohydrates. Whenever carbs come from whole plant foods, like beans and vegetables, fruits, whole grains, that sort of thing, they are protective, consistently protective to human health. If we look at optimal health guidelines, we want to minimize our intake of refined carbs. Population dietary goals set by the World Health Organization are 55 to 75% of energy as carbs. Free sugars should be less than 10% of our calories. So what is that? Well, for most people, around 2,000 calorie diet, 13 teaspoons of sugar. And most people say, 13 teaspoons of sugar in one day? Nobody could eat that much. Look at the sugar content of common foods. 1 32-ounce slush, 28 teaspoons. A 12-ounce soda, 10 to 13 teaspoons. People are taking in just a ton of sugar in the form of beverages. And look at even a low-fat fruit yogurt, 7 to 10 teaspoons of sugar. Practical pointers here. Rely on whole plant foods for most of your carbs. Vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Read labels. You can find a lovely looking bread that says natural on the front or organic or whole grain, but they may contain a lot of things that are not so desirable. If you see wheat flour on a label, it is white flour. Unless it says stone ground whole wheat or whole wheat flour, it's white flour. You want to minimize refined carbs, both starches and sugars. Moving on to sodium. High sodium intake can contribute to hypertension, heart disease, osteoporosis, and certain forms of cancer like stomach cancer. 75% comes from processed foods, about 15% from salt added at the table or in cooking, and about 5% from sodium naturally present in unprocessed foods. Check this out. Kraft Dinner, 1 cup, 1,460 milligrams. Move your way on down, and you'll notice bread, 170, commercial cereal, like Corn Flakes or Rice Krispies, 200 to 350 milligrams of sodium, which is actually more than an ounce of potato chips and an ounce of salted peanuts combined. Practical pointers here, just limit the processed foods and read labels. Use salt and salty seasonings sparingly. And of course, the most commonly used salty seasonings, I think, are things like soy sauce and Bragg's and tamari. And beware of condiments and sauces, period. Step 2 is to pile on the protectors. And please don't underestimate the importance of this step. Step 1 is super important, but if you don't pile on the protectors, you will never achieve optimal nutrition. And what we're talking about is whole plant foods, phytochemicals, antioxidant nutrients, fiber, and healthful fats. And let's start out with phytochemicals. What are phytochemicals? Well, they are naturally occurring chemicals found in plants that basically give plants their flavor, color, texture, odor. They regulate plant growth. They defend plants against attacks by insects. And they can defend people too when we consume them. They're not present in animal foods. All animal products contain 0 phytochemicals, none. Phytochemicals have very potent anti-cancer activity. They literally can take carcinogenic compounds and turn them into water-soluble compounds so we can get rid of them. They have anti-cardiovascular disease activity, anti-estrogenic, anti-inflammatory, immune-enhancing, antioxidant, anti-motion sickness, even antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, and anti-yeast activity. So we cannot even begin to go through each and every one of the phytochemicals because there are literally thousands and thousands of them. We're just going to talk about maximizing our intake and a couple of what we might call the phytochemical champions. Number 1, cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables are things like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale. And they contain a couple of compounds that are very, very potent. One is called indoles, and indoles induce protective enzyme systems, helping to excrete carcinogens. They also decrease the more potent human form of estrogen, the estradiol, or what we call the 16-hydroxy radical, and they increase the less potent radical, which is really important for reducing hormone-related cancers. The isothiocyanates, again, inducing detoxifying enzyme systems, and they also suppress cell proliferation, or the division of cells, and tumor promotion. The umbelliferae, which we're talking about carrots, parsley, parsnips, celery, they actually contain natural coumarins, like they inhibit blood coagulation. They have a lot of flavones, antioxidants, carotenoids, phthalates, and polyacetylenes, which have very good anti-tumor activity as well. The allium vegetables contain a number of, or what we call organosulfur compounds, or sulfur-containing compounds that have very unique properties, like allicin, which is antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, and ajones with antithrombotic activity, which helps protect us from heart attacks, vinyl dithiones, which are anti-asthmatic, allyl sulfides, which have anti-cancer and anti-cardiovascular disease activity. The point here is simply to understand that we can get such a wide variety of these very protective compounds, and when we prepare foods in different ways, we can enjoy the full benefit of all of them. Citrus fruits, we get over 170 different phytochemicals in a single orange, 60 different flavonoids, 40 different limonoids, which can reduce the synthesis of cholesterol, 20 different carotenoids. A lot of people think carotenoids are just beta-carotene, that's it. There are probably 50 or 60 different carotenoids we get regularly from foods. Berries, very interesting. Wild blueberries, actually very, very potent in terms of phytochemical content. And actually the USDA did a little study looking at 40 different fruits and vegetables, and they found that blueberries had the highest what we call oxygen radical absorbency capacity, or ORAC score, of all of the foods tested. And what this score is it's just the ability for the food to quench free radicals. And the main compounds are what we call phenolic compounds, like anthocyanins in blueberries. And the anthocyanins are actually in the purple blue of the blueberries, so that sort of the outer skin. And wild blueberries have more than cultivated blueberries just because they're smaller and they have more skin. Practical pointers here. Eat a wide variety of colorful whole plant foods. And here's what we want. We want at least, you can do even more than this, but at least 9 servings of veggies and fruits a day. And you want to aim for 3 servings of greens, and preferably leafy greens. If you supersize anything, you want to supersize your greens. At least 1 red, so that could be like tomatoes, 1 orange yellow, an orange, sweet potato, squash, 1 purple blue like blueberries or plums, and 1 white like bananas or cauliflower. give you the whole array of phytochemicals. You want to include at least a serving of legumes and at least a serving of nuts and a serving of seeds in the daily diet to maximize phytochemical intake. I told you about the ORAC score. This is just a different score. It's called the FRAP score, so it's another way of measuring antioxidant activity. And I wanted to point this out because if you look at wild blueberries, they have a score of 8.2. Pomegranates a little higher at 11.3, and walnuts at 21, more than double that of wild blueberries. So there are some foods that have amazing ability to be protective to health. Walnuts are one of them. So now moving on to the antioxidant nutrients. One of the things that I get asked a lot is, well, should I get my antioxidants from whole foods or should I get my antioxidants from supplements? And what we know at this point is antioxidants provide a fairly good defense force that diminishes oxidative stress, but the antioxidants in foods appear to offer greater protection than the antioxidants in supplements. Antioxidant vitamin supplements, most of the testing on them has failed to show that they are very protective to human health. We want to maximize antioxidant intakes with fresh, whole foods. When we look specifically at vitamin C, we know we need enough vitamin C. We know that evidence for supplemental vitamin C is pretty limited. Very best sources of vitamin C, of course, are fruits and vegetables. We know about citrus fruits, but also things like peppers and strawberries, broccoli, potatoes, tomatoes, good sources. Carotenoids, I think this is really important. They are especially adept free radical scavengers, which means they help to get rid of those pro-oxidants. But interestingly enough, supplemental carotenoids, like beta-carotene, for example, doesn't appear to afford the protection of the mixed carotenoids from food. When you load up with a supplement like beta-carotene, you saturate your blood with one carotenoid. And probably you need 10 carotenoids. When you saturate your blood with beta-carotene, you don't absorb the other carotenoids very well, like the lycopene and the other carotenoids that are protective. So that's why we still, playing God still doesn't work that well. We are still best off with whole foods. And the best sources of these carotenoids are the yellow-orange fruits and vegetables. I should also mention that carotenoids are antioxidants. The vitamin A from animal products, no antioxidant potential whatsoever, no antioxidant activity. Vitamin E is quite a story, and you've probably heard the research from last year that vitamin E doesn't afford the protection against heart disease that we once thought it did. Well, vitamin E is actually not just alpha-tocopherol, which is what you usually see in the stores. It's actually a family of 8 antioxidants, 4 tocopherols and 4 tocotrienols. The evidence almost consistently against vitamin E was for alpha-tocopherol. And so I think it's the very same story as the beta-carotene story. Probably if we were supplementing with a mixture of all of the tocopherols and all of the tocotrienols, we might see some advantage. But that's not what most people are doing. We're still better off getting our vitamin E from whole foods where we get the variety. And the best sources are things like wheat germ oil, or wheat germ, of course, the whole food is always best. Nuts and seeds, whole grains, and green leafy vegetables. Selenium, another story. Poor selenium status increases our risk of disease. Your best sources are nuts, especially Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts, one nut contains about 105 micrograms of selenium. We need about 55 micrograms a day. Interesting mushrooms are listed here as well, and mushrooms are one of those foods that everybody thinks contains nothing. Mushrooms are about 30% of calories from protein, and they are loaded with B vitamins and trace minerals. Practical pointers, just eat a variety of colorful veggies and supersize your greens. And this is how you should eat it. A salad that most people would serve to 6 people, that's your salad. I'm not kidding. That's how you should eat salad. 8 cups. And eat nuts and seeds daily. And stick to whole grains if you're using grains. Dietary fiber, low fiber intakes are linked to overweight and obesity, elevated cholesterol and triglycerides, poor blood sugar control, colon cancer, and all sorts of gastrointestinal disorders like constipation and irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel diseases. There are really two types of fiber. One is called viscous fiber. We used to call it soluble fiber. We now call it viscous fiber. But this is stuff like pectins and beta-glucans and gums and mucilages. This type of fiber reduces blood cholesterol and helps control blood sugar levels. It's not always easy to tell if a food has mainly soluble or mainly insoluble or non-viscous fiber. But one of the ways you can tell is by mixing the food with water. If you mix oats with water and you leave it for a day, it gets very thick and sticky. That means they have a lot of viscous fiber. If you mix wheat bran with water, it doesn't get thick and sticky at all. That means it's mostly non-viscous fiber. So the best sources of viscous fiber are oats, beans, barley, flax seeds, peas, okra, some fruits and vegetables as well. All foods that contain fiber contain a mix of viscous and non-viscous, but most foods are more non-viscous than viscous. And so non-viscous are things like cellulose, lignans, hemicelluloses. They are the things that help to keep your gastrointestinal system clean and healthy. Refined grains contain very little fiber, commercial baked goods, very little fiber. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy products, sugar, do not contain 1 gram of fiber. Optimal diet, 35 to 50 grams, is what really provides protection, what will level off blood sugar, what will help to reduce blood cholesterol levels. How do we get that? Actual intakes, general population, about 10 to 20 grams a day. Vegetarians, about 30 to 40, and vegans, about 40 to 50 grams of fiber a day. Once again, vegans are bang on where they should be. Practical pointers here. Eat plenty of high fiber foods. To get 35 to 50 grams, we would need about, and this is just for sort of a mixed diet, about 5 servings of whole grains, 8 of vegetables and fruits, 2 of legumes, 1 of nuts and seeds. That would provide the 35 to 50 grams. Please, don't assume that sprinkling low fiber foods with wheat bran will do the trick. And that's what most meat eaters tend to do if they're trying to increase fiber, is they just sprinkle a little bran on their breakfast cereal and think they've got it beat. They don't. You are getting one type of fiber. It's mainly non-viscous or insoluble fiber, and it really doesn't help with cholesterol and some of the other challenges we have. It's probably even worse for a vegetarian or a vegan to sprinkle their food with wheat bran than it is for an omnivore to sprinkle their food with wheat bran, and I'll tell you why. Wheat bran is like concentrated phytates. Phytates are one of the biggest factors in reducing mineral absorption in vegan and vegetarian diets. Finally, healthful fats. Not all fat is bad for human health. In fact, some fat is absolutely essential to life, without which you would die. Fats are necessary for insulation, padding, protection for our vital organs, just physical padding. Formation of healthy cell membranes. If you eat healthful fats, that's what gets into your cell membranes. Development and functioning of the brain and nervous system. Did you know that the brain is mainly fat? 40% of the gray matter of the brain is actually DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. So we need a certain amount of fats, particularly essential fats. And finally, the absorption of fat-soluble nutrients and phytochemicals. If your dietary fat goes much below about 15% of calories, you will compromise your absorption of certain nutrients and phytochemicals. Now, I'm not saying that you need to pour oil on your foods. You absolutely do not need 1 single gram of concentrated fats and oils. Your very best sources of fat are from whole plant foods. These foods are packaged by nature to protect them from light, heat, and oxygen. And they are loaded with protectors. Nothing added, nothing removed. You know, it's like white flour. When we make white flour, we're removing all the good stuff. When we take and make vegetable oil from the vegetable or the nut or seed, we're leaving behind the most valuable components of the plant, and we're just using the fat, period. We are much better off with the whole foods. Nuts, I think, are one of the most underrated foods in the diet. It was interesting that there have been about 5 large epidemiological studies looking at nuts as a protective food, and they have found on average that people that eat nuts 5 or more times a week have 50% reduced risk of heart disease. And in fact, one study, it was a Seventh-day Adventist health study, they looked at 65 different foods, and they found out of all 65 foods, the most protective food that people were eating was nuts. And we're not talking about nuts coated in chocolate or nuts coated in sugar. We're talking about raw nuts, whole nuts. And in fact, one study found a 20 to 30% risk reduction in type 2 diabetes with regular nut consumption. So what is it that makes nuts protective? Vitamins like vitamin E, they're one of our best sources of vitamin E, B vitamins, a number of phytochemicals like ellagic acid, lignans, which are very potent anti-carcinogens, trace minerals, very important source of trace minerals like selenium, copper, zinc, magnesium, and arginine. I don't know if you've heard of arginine. It's an amino acid that is actually converted in your bloodstream to nitric oxide, which is a very potent vasodilator, increasing blood flow. So very protective. Seeds, again, very good sources of vitamins, trace minerals, plant protein, phytochemicals, and fiber. They are among our very, very best sources of essential fatty acids and vitamin E. So very, very important. Avocados, a lot of people stay away from avocados because they have so much fat. But they are loaded with good fat and other protective compounds. They contain more folate, potassium per ounce than any other fruit. It's quite amazing. Great source of vitamin C and E, and they are very, very rich in phytosterols or plant sterols, more than 4 times the beta-sitosterol of other fruits. One of our richest sources of glutathione, triple that of most other fruits. And glutathione is probably the most potent antioxidant that we can consume. Essential fatty acids, I just want to mention a couple of words. These are fats we can't make in our bodies. We have to get them from our diet. There are really 2 types of essential fats, the omega-6 family and the omega-3 family. In the omega-6 family, the essential fat is called linoleic acid. In the omega-3 family, it's called alpha-linolenic acid. They can't be interchanged. We've got to consume both omega-6 and omega-3. It's really a matter of balance for these 2 fats. 2 times more omega-6 than omega-3. Unfortunately, most people consume 10 to 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. Of course, this imbalance can increase our risk of diseases. There are a lot of diseases that are associated to suboptimal omega-3 status. A lot of chronic diseases, behavioral disorders, schizophrenia, ADHD, depression, several immune inflammatory disorders like arthritis, and even suboptimal infant development. So how do we put a lid on omega-6s? The easiest way is not to use omega-6 rich oils. Just get rid of them. If you use any oils at all, first of all, there are some oils that people use as a little bit of sesame oil in flavoring or something like that. But certainly they should never be a primary oil if you're a person that does use these things. Moderate your intake of processed foods made with those oils, things like margarines, mayonnaises, and salad dressings, and other cookies, crackers, and so forth. Now, the more important thing is to increase our omega-3s. That's a challenge that we all need to consider. We need 1.25 to 2% of calories. That's about 3 to 5 grams a day for most people. So what is 3 to 5 grams a day? Well, if you're consuming flax seeds, that's about 2.6, it's about a tablespoon. You get about 2.6 grams, and you can be sure you'll get at least 0.4 grams from greens and other things that you're eating. Even walnuts, an ounce gives you about the amount you would need for a day. Leafy greens are interesting. They are about half of the fat in leafy greens is omega-3. Flax seeds we think of as the richest source. They're about 57% omega-3. Hemp seeds are about 19% omega-3. Walnuts are about 12 to 15% omega-3. Greens are 50% omega-3 and some even more. Problem is they're very low in fat. So you really truly need to supersize them to get 3 grams. You'd need to eat 30 cups. So you need to eat like a horse or a cow all day long, and not that many people have time to do that. So they can contribute to your overall omega-3 intake, But relying on them as your only source of omega-3 may be a little bit problematic. Fish and fish oil, of course, are the most concentrated sources of these long-chain omega-3s and have been found to be cardioprotective in high-risk populations, like the North American meat-eating population. However, we have a number of studies that have shown that fish consumption doesn't seem to reduce heart disease risk in low-risk populations. So people that are already vegetarian don't seem to enjoy any advantage by adding fish to their diets. Cultured microalgae for people that really do need a source of long-chain omega-3s. Did you know that fish don't actually make DHA and EPA? They get it from plankton and microalgae. And so we can get it there too. So this is a very, very reasonable option. We can get DHA from a supplemental microalgae. At this point, that's all we can get. The advantages of getting it this way is that this type of DHA is clean. It's free of heavy metals and environmental contaminants. It's a completely renewable resource. We actually grow it. We don't harvest it from the ocean. We just culture it. We culture DHA-rich microalgae, and then we put it in cap form. And you can get it in a vegan cap, so it's a veg cap instead of a gel cap. The type that I would recommend is called Omega Zen 3 by Nutritional, and there's 300 milligrams of DHA per cap. You might be wondering, well, who needs it? The people that I would, not everybody needs it, but the people that I would suggest may want to consider using it are pregnant and lactating women, because the gray matter of the brain in their infant is 40% DHA. We want to maximize DHA, and vegans tend to have about half the levels of DHA compared to omnivores, and their breast milk is also quite low. So we want to maximize it. So I would say pregnant and lactating women would be wise to take, one cap of 300 milligrams a day. The other people that might want to consider it are people with type 2 diabetes. They don't convert the plant type of... See, we can actually convert alpha-linolenic acid from flaxseed into the long-chain omega-3s. We actually do a pretty good job at producing EPA. We don't do a very good job at producing DHA. People with challenges like arthritis and challenges like schizophrenia or depression may also do well taking a supplement. Other than that, I think most of us are okay. And finally, step number 3, ensure all nutrient needs are met. I don't have time to go into this, so I'm just going to tell you that the primary nutrients that people are concerned with are generally protein, iron, zinc, calcium, vitamin D, omega-3s, vitamin B12, and iodine in a vegan diet. But we've developed a food guide called the Vegan Food Guide, and if you follow this guide, you will be pretty much guaranteed to get what you need. A very quick summary. Number 1, center your diet on a wide variety of whole plant foods. 9 or more servings of veggies and fruits, 5 or more of whole grains, 1 or 2 of nuts and seeds, 2 or 3 of legumes, 33 to 50 grams of fiber. Minimize processed and refined carbs. Rely mainly on plants for your protein. Moderate the quantity of fat you eat, but focus on quality. Make sure you're getting your fat primarily from whole plant foods. Get rid of trans fats, cut down on saturated fats, avoid deep fried foods. Make sure you include a source of omega-3s. And finally, do not overeat. This is a real slide. This is a pub in Pennsylvania. We are supersizing everything, and in the process, we're supersizing the population. But this burger contains 6 pounds of beef per burger, 12 slices of processed cheese, a monstrous white bun with all the trimming. One burger has 11,378 calories, 732 grams of fat, 251 grams of saturated fat, 2,036 milligrams of cholesterol, and over 15,740 milligrams of sodium. If you supersize, what do you supersize? Greens. Yes. There is absolutely no question that plant-based diets are best for human health. This quote comes from Marion Nessel, who is a former director of nutrition policy for the U.S. Department of Health, and she was the managing editor of the Surgeon General's report. There's no question that largely vegetarian diets are as healthy as you can get. The evidence is so strong and overwhelming and produced over such a long period of time, it is no longer debatable. Becoming vegan is probably the most powerful step any one individual can take towards the preservation of this planet. It takes about 1/20th the resources to feed a vegan that it does to feed a non-vegetarian. Intensive animal agriculture pollutes air, water, and soil. It contributes to desertification, deforestation, and species extinction. You know, when my son was about 3 years old, we were driving by McDonald's. He'd seen the commercials of McDonald's burgers growing on the trees. You remember that Hamburglar commercial where the Hamburglar steals the burgers off the trees? And he said to me, I really, really want a McDonald's hamburger. At this point, I had never explained to him why we didn't eat chicken and fish and pork and beef. I thought it was time to explain it to him. So I said to him, Corey, the McDonald's hamburgers are not the same as the burgers we eat at home. I said, the ones at McDonald's are made of cows. And he looked at me like I had just lost my marbles. He said, Mom, people do not eat cows. And then I had to proceed. I had to tell him that not only do they eat cows, they eat pigs, they eat chickens, they eat all of that stuff. He started to cry, and he said, but don't people know that cows are people too? Don't they know cows have eyes? They have ears. They feel. And I thought to myself, how could we have forgotten what we knew as little children? How could we have forgotten? And with that, I know I've gone over time, and I thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing your evening with me, and I'll stay here as long as you need to ask me questions.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I've never heard so much information in an hour and a half in my life. That was so wonderful. And thank you so much for coming.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.